night on Earth was quiet. A cool breeze moved gently through the trees of a small forest outside the town. Tomas walked along a narrow trail, his boots crunching against the dry leaves. He enjoyed coming here after work. The forest gave him peace, a place where he could think without noise or people. He carried a small flashlight, though the moon above gave enough light to guide him. He had no idea his life was about to change forever. As he walked deeper into the forest, he heard something strange. It was not the sound of an animal or the rustle of leaves. It was a low hum like metal vibrating far away. He stopped, looking around, but saw nothing. The sound grew louder, surrounding him, pressing against his ears until he felt his bones shake. Tomas dropped his flashlight and covered his ears, but it did not help. The sound was everywhere. Then came the light. A blue glow spread across the trees, brighter and brighter until the night was gone. Tomas looked up and froze. Above him hung a massive shape dark against the glowing sky. It was no plane. It was no helicopter. The shape was round, with sharp edges that curved like blades. Lights blinked across its surface, shifting in patterns that made no sense to his eyes. Before Tomas could move, a beam of white light shot down from the ship and wrapped around him. His feet lifted from the ground. He reached for the trees, clawing at branches, but his fingers slipped. The beam pulled him upward. His heart pounded as he rose higher and higher. The forest grew smaller below him until it disappeared in the glow. The next moment, the forest was gone. Tomas found himself lying on a cold metal floor. His vision blurred and the hum of machines filled his ears. He tried to sit up, but his arms felt heavy. Slowly, his sight cleared. He was in a large room made of steel, with glowing lines running along the walls. Strange machines hummed around him, and he could see doors that slid open without touch. Tomas's breathing quickened. He knew at once this was no place built by human hands. From the shadows, figures appeared. They were tall, taller than any person he had ever seen, their bodies wrapped in dark armor that shimmered with blue light. Their faces were hidden behind masks shaped like the skulls of beasts with glowing red eyes that fixed on him. Each carried a long weapon that hummed with power. One of them stepped closer and tilted its head as if studying him. The mask's red eyes narrowed. A sound followed, a deep growl-like voice that Tomas could not understand. It was speaking in a language he had never heard. The others answered in the same harsh tongue, their words sharp and cold. Fear rose in Tomas's chest. He forced himself to breathe slowly. If he panicked now, he would lose control. He clenched his fists, ready to fight if they tried to touch him. But instead of striking, they lifted a small device. A bright light flashed across his face. The tall figures studied the device, then turned away as if his presence was nothing more than a check on their list. They moved him down a long corridor. The walls glowed faintly, and the floor vibrated beneath his boots as if the whole ship was alive. Strange sounds echoed from behind the doors they passed. Roars, screeches, and metallic clashing. It felt like a prison, but also something more. Finally, they pushed him into another room. The door slid shut behind him. He was alone now. The room was dim, its walls made of glass. Beyond the glass, he could see a vast jungle stretching out, glowing faintly with plants that shimmered in colors his eyes struggled to name. The trees twisted in strange shapes, their leaves large and sharp like blades. The ground shifted with movement as if unseen creatures crawled beneath the soil. Tomas stepped closer to the glass. The jungle stretched farther than he could see, but something felt wrong. It was not natural. The sky above was not a sky at all. It was a dome of metal with lights meant to mimic stars. He realized it was a cage, an artificial world. Then he noticed the voices. Above him, hidden speakers carried the sound of a crowd, many voices laughing, cheering, and speaking in the same harsh alien tongue. It was a stadium. He was being displayed to an audience. Tomas's chest grew tight. He looked at his hands, his reflection in the glass. He was no soldier, no warrior. He had lived an ordinary life, and yet here he was, dragged from Earth and put on display like an animal. He did not know why, but he could guess. The weapons, the masks, the armored figures, they were hunters. He turned as the door opened again. One of the armored aliens entered, carrying a small object. The hunter placed it on the floor. It unfolded with a click, revealing a set of bones broken and burned. Tomas stared at them in silence. The hunter spoke in its harsh language, then pointed to the jungle beyond the glass. With slow, heavy steps, the hunter left, the door closing behind him. The message was clear. Others had been here before him. They had not survived. Tomas sat against the cold wall. He closed his eyes and tried to steady his thoughts. Fear wanted to take over, but he forced himself to think. He remembered the traps he had made as a child in the woods, the way he had once hunted rabbits with nothing but sticks and patience. He remembered stories of his grandfather, who had fought through wars with little more than courage and will. He opened his eyes. His heart no longer pounded with panic but with fire. If these aliens wanted a hunt, they would not find easy prey. He would not die for their sport. Hours passed before the door opened again. A deep horn echoed through the ship, and the glass wall in front of Tomas slid open. The jungle beyond stretched before him, dark and alive with strange sounds. The crowd above roared with excitement. The hunt was about to begin. Tomas stepped forward. His boots touched the soil of the false jungle. The air was thick and heavy, filled with the smell of plants and the buzzing of insects. He knew eyes were on him from every corner, but he did not look back. He did not run. He walked slowly, carefully, studying every tree, every vine, every shadow. Somewhere behind him the hunters would follow. They would come with weapons and armor, believing themselves superior. But Tomas had something they did not. He had the will to survive, and he had the anger of a man stolen from his world. The game had begun, and Tomas would make sure they regretted ever choosing him. The jungle was alive with sound. Strange birds cried from high branches, and unseen creatures rustled through the glowing bushes. The air was thick and damp, carrying the smell of moss and metal. Tomas moved carefully, his steps light as he studied the alien forest. Every sense in his body screamed danger. Somewhere behind him, hunters would come, and they would not rest until he was caught. He crouched near a tree with wide leaves shaped like blades. He touched the soil beneath him. It was loose, filled with roots and hidden insects. He pulled at a root, testing its strength, and a thought came to him. If the soil was this soft, then traps could be made. A small fire of hope sparked in his mind. Tomas searched the jungle floor, gathering what he could find. He picked up stones shaped with sharp edges. He tore vines from trees and tied them together, testing their strength by pulling hard. They did not snap. He remembered the days of his youth when he had built snares to catch rabbits. The tools were different now, but the idea was the same. The crowd above, unseen but always present, cheered as his every movement was tracked. They wanted a chase. They wanted to see him run and scream. But Tomas did not run. He built. By the time the sky above shifted from bright to dark, lights on the dome simulating night, he had prepared his first trap. A pit near a tree covered with branches and leaves, sharp stones placed at the bottom, crude but deadly if someone stepped wrong. Tomas sat in the shadows, waiting. The jungle grew quiet. Too quiet. His skin prickled as if the trees themselves were warning him. Then he heard it, a faint hiss of metal, the sound of something heavy stepping on the soil. Tomas pressed himself low, heart steady. From between the glowing plants a figure emerged. One of the hunters. Tall, armored, with a weapon in hand that pulsed with blue energy. The mask on its face glowed red as it scanned the area. It moved slowly, confident, as if nothing in this jungle could harm it. Tomas stayed still, watching every move. The hunter was heading straight for the pit. The ground cracked. The hunter's foot sank. In an instant, the branches broke and the hunter fell with a crash. The sharp stones cut through its armor and a loud roar filled the jungle. The crowd above gasped, then shouted in excitement. Tomas moved fast. He grabbed a thick branch and rushed to the edge of the pit. The hunter tried to rise, but Tomas swung the branch with all his strength, striking the mask. The glass cracked. Another strike, and sparks burst from the weapon the hunter tried to lift. Breathing hard, Tomas stepped back. The hunter struggled in the pit, groaning in its strange language, unable to climb out. Tomas looked at the glowing weapon lying on the ground. For a moment he hesitated. It was alien, dangerous, but if he could learn it, it might save him. He picked it up. The weapon hummed in his hands, heavy but powerful. The crowd roared louder. They had expected him to run, but he had fought. Tomas left the pit behind, moving deeper into the jungle. His heart was pounding, but not from fear. This time it was from something else. He had survived the first encounter. He had proved he was not helpless. The hunters were not gods. They could bleed, they could fall, and they could be beaten. Hours passed. Tomas hid the weapon under leaves when he rested, too afraid of pressing the wrong mark and burning himself. Instead, he relied on his traps and his instincts. Each sound of movement made him alert. He drank water from large leaves and chewed bitter fruit that hung from branches. spitting out the seeds. His body was tired, but his will was stronger than before. When the next hunter came, Thomas was ready. This one moved faster, scanning with a glowing visor that cut through the shadows. Thomas had built another trap, a vine stretched between two trees tied to a heavy branch. As the hunter stepped forward, the vine snapped and the branch swung down, striking the hunter across the chest. The alien stumbled but did not fall. Thomas dashed forward, grabbing the weapon he had hidden. He pointed it at the hunter and pressed the mark on its side. A burst of blue light shot forward, striking the armored chest. The hunter staggered, its armor glowing hot. Another burst sent it crashing against a tree. Silence followed. Then the crowd erupted again, louder than before. Thomas dropped the weapon, his arms shaking. The power of it was frightening, but it had saved him. He looked at the fallen hunter and felt no joy. He knew more would come. The game had only started. That night he built more traps. Pits, swinging logs, sharp stakes hidden under leaves. Every trap was a reminder of his choice. He would not die on his knees. If the hunters wanted him, they would pay for every step they took. The dome sky shifted once more, and with it came a sound that shook the trees. A horn, deep and sharp, echoed across the jungle. Thomas froze. It was a signal. The hunters were regrouping. From the distance he heard their voices, harsh and angry. They were no longer playing with him. They were coming as a pack. Thomas pressed his back against a tree, clutching the alien weapon. His eyes burned with fire. He whispered to himself, a promise carried into the night. You think I am prey, but I will be your nightmare. The jungle roared with strange life, but nothing was louder than his will. The hunters were coming, and Thomas was ready to fight. The false jungle was still. Yet Thomas could feel danger moving within it. The deep horn had sounded, and that meant the hunters were no longer scattered. They would come together now, moving as a group. They had lost two of their own to him, and their pride would not allow them to take him lightly anymore. Thomas crouched near a fallen log, his hand resting on the alien weapon he had taken. The weapon was heavy, its glowing lines pulsing faintly like veins of light. He did not fully understand it, but he had learned one thing. Pressing the side mark released bursts of energy strong enough to break armor. That knowledge was enough for now. The air was damp, filled with mist rising from the glowing plants. Every sound echoed, the buzz of insects, the drip of water, the shifting of leaves. Thomas moved silently, his steps practiced from hours of stalking through the forest back home. He remembered how his grandfather had taught him to move quietly when hunting deer. Every step placed on the side of his foot, rolling slowly to avoid snapping twigs. Those lessons now became the difference between life and death. Through the mist, Thomas saw faint lights ahead. Red eyes glowed in the darkness. The hunters were moving, their armor flashing as they scanned the jungle. Their weapons hummed with energy. He counted 3 of them, moving together in a careful line. Thomas gripped the weapon tighter but stopped himself from charging. He could not win head-on. He needed patience. He needed to become a shadow. He climbed into a tree, pulling himself up with silent effort. The vines wrapped around his arms as he steadied himself on a wide branch. From above, he watched the hunters pass beneath him. Their movements were slow, confident, but their heads turned often. They were cautious now. They had learned from the failures of their fallen comrades. One of the hunters paused, scanning the ground. Its mask emitted a sharp red beam sweeping across the soil. The beam touched the pit Thomas had dug earlier, and the hunter let out a sharp sound. It had found the trap. The other 2 approached, laughing in their guttural language. Thomas felt his teeth clench. They thought themselves clever for finding one pit, but they did not know that he had prepared more than one. He waited until all 3 hunters were close together, then reached for a vine he had tied earlier. The vine stretched across branches above the path. With one hard pull, Thomas released the tension. A heavy log he had balanced swung down from the trees. It slammed into the lead hunter, sending it crashing to the ground. The other 2 spun in shock, weapons raised, but Thomas was already moving. He dropped from the tree, landing hard on one hunter's back. The alien staggered, roaring, as Thomas struck its head with the butt of the stolen weapon. Sparks burst from the mask. The 3rd hunter fired, blue energy flashing past Thomas's head. He rolled away, pressing the side mark of the weapon in his hand. A burst of light struck the alien's chest, forcing it back. The crowd above roared in excitement, their voices echoing like thunder through the dome. The downed hunter tried to rise, but Thomas did not hesitate. He swung the weapon again, striking the cracked mask until it split. The alien collapsed, unmoving. Thomas turned to the second who had recovered and now charged. Their weapons clashed, alien steel against stolen power. Thomas pressed the mark again and again, the weapon burning in his hands until the hunter fell back against a tree, smoke rising from its armor. Breathing heavily, Thomas looked around. The first hunter, the one hit by the log, was gone. He had escaped into the jungle. Thomas knew he would not be gone long. For a moment, silence returned. Then the jungle itself seemed to shiver. The crowd above erupted louder than ever. Thomas could almost feel their excitement, their disbelief. This was not the show they had expected. Thomas wiped sweat from his brow. His arms ached and his chest burned with every breath. Yet his mind was clear. He understood now. The hunters were not gods. They were flesh and blood, just like him. They relied on their weapons and armor. Without them, they were vulnerable. He sat under the tree for a short while, forcing himself to think. Running would not work anymore. They would not stop until he was dead. If he stayed on the defensive, he would eventually tire and fall. No, he had to change the game. He had to strike first. For the first time, Thomas made a decision that shifted everything. He would no longer simply survive. He would hunt them. The hours that followed were filled with work. He moved through the jungle, setting traps not only for defense but for ambush. He sharpened branches into spears, tying them with vines to create hidden weapons. He layered pits, some shallow to confuse, others deep to wound. He covered his tracks with care, leaving false trails to mislead. As he worked, he remembered stories of wolves. A wolf cornered was dangerous, but a wolf that chose its ground was deadlier still. Thomas was that wolf now. When the hunters returned, they did not come in small numbers. 4 of them marched together, weapons glowing brighter than before. Their steps shook the soil, their voices harsh as they spoke in their alien tongue. They were angry now. Thomas waited in silence, hidden in the shadows. His traps were ready. His mind was calm. The first hunter stepped onto a path lined with leaves. Beneath the leaves were sharpened stakes hidden deep in the soil. The alien's foot sank, and with a cry it collapsed as the stakes pierced its leg. The others turned in shock, but Thomas did not give them time. From the trees, he released a vine. A net of sharp branches swung down, striking another hunter across the shoulders. The crowd roared louder than ever. The remaining 2 fired wildly, blue light burning through the jungle. Trees split apart, leaves turned to ash, but Thomas kept moving. He dashed from cover to cover, pressing the mark on his weapon whenever he saw an opening. Bursts of light struck their armor, forcing them back. The hunter caught in the stakes tried to pull free, but Thomas rushed him. He leapt onto the armored chest, pressing the weapon close and firing at point blank. The armor cracked, sparks flying until the hunter lay still. The others hesitated now. Their formation was broken, their pride wounded. They looked around as if the jungle itself had turned against them. For the first time, Thomas saw it, the fear in their red glowing eyes. The crowd above fell into silence. The hunters had become the prey. Thomas stood tall, holding the weapon steady. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but his eyes burned with fire. He had survived the first hunts. He had turned the jungle into his ground, and now the hunters knew the truth. He was not a victim. He was not a weak creature dragged from his home. He was their nightmare. The jungle echoed with distant sounds of more hunters gathering, but Thomas no longer felt fear. Instead, he felt something stronger, something new. A will that grew sharper with every trap, every strike, every breath. The game had changed, and Thomas was now the one leading it. The jungle was no longer filled with the hunters' confidence. Their heavy steps, once proud and loud, now carried caution. Their voices, once sharp with arrogance, now whispered with unease. What had started as a game for them had changed. They had brought a human into their arena to be prey, but instead, they had watched him strike down one hunter after another. Above, the audience murmured in confusion. At first, they had cheered for the spectacle. They had laughed when the human was released into the false jungle. But now their cheers had become quiet. Their eyes followed the screens that showed Thomas's every movement. He was no longer a victim. He was something else entirely, and even the richest spectators began to feel the weight of his defiance. Thomas moved through the jungle with steady purpose. He no longer walked as someone hiding. His steps were careful but sure. His traps were now scattered across the jungle. each one a silent guardian waiting for its prey. He carried the stolen weapon close, its glowing lines humming softly in his hand. His face was streaked with dirt, his clothes torn, but his eyes burned with focus. He had survived this long not because of luck, but because of will. He had learned how the hunters thought. He had seen how they underestimated him. Now he used that against them. From the shadows, Thomas watched as another group of hunters moved along the path below. 4 of them this time, their armor glimmering with sharp light, their weapons humming. They moved closer together than before, checking every corner, aiming their red beams across the ground. They spoke less now, their voices low. Thomas saw hesitation in the way their heads turned. They were not chasing him with joy anymore. They were looking over their shoulders, expecting him to appear at any moment. He could feel their unease. He waited until they passed, then slipped quietly behind them. He moved like a shadow, his footsteps hidden under the buzz of insects and the rustle of leaves. He followed them for a while, learning their rhythm, their distance from one another. Then he struck. He pulled hard on a vine tied to a heavy branch above. The branch swung down, striking the last hunter in line. The alien crashed to the ground, weapon tumbling from its hands. The others spun around, but Thomas was already gone, vanishing back into the jungle. The crowd gasped, then grew restless. They wanted to see blood, but all they saw was fear. The hunters shouted to one another, voices rising. They spread apart slightly, weapons raised, scanning the shadows. But spreading apart was a mistake. Thomas had been waiting for that. A short distance ahead, he had laid another trap. A shallow pit lined with sharpened sticks hidden under layers of leaves. The second hunter stepped forward, and the ground gave way. With a cry, the alien fell, its armor pierced by the hidden spikes. It struggled, roaring in its language, but the spikes held firm. The other 2 fired blindly into the jungle, bolts of blue energy ripping through trees. Leaves exploded into ash, branches fell, and the false jungle filled with light. But Thomas had already circled behind them. He raised his stolen weapon and fired. A burst of energy struck one of the hunters in the back, sending him forward. The alien crashed against a tree, sparks flying from its armor. The last one turned, aiming at Thomas, but Thomas ducked low and rolled. The shot passed above his head, burning the air. He pressed the mark on the weapon again. Another burst of light hit the hunter's chest. The armor cracked, glowing red, and the alien collapsed to its knees. Thomas did not stop. He rushed forward, striking with the butt of the weapon until the mask shattered. The alien fell silent. The crowd above was hushed. The spectacle had turned into something else. They were no longer entertained. They were unsettled. They had watched prey become predator, and they could not understand how. Thomas stood over the fallen hunters, breathing hard. His arms shook with exhaustion, but his eyes remained sharp. He knew more would come. They would not stop until they had him. But he also knew something else. He had planted fear in their hearts. That fear was now his greatest weapon. He disappeared back into the jungle, leaving the broken bodies behind for others to find. He wanted the hunters to see them. He wanted them to walk into the jungle and realize their comrades had been taken down by the very creature they had mocked. The hunters came in larger groups now. 6, then 8, their armor brighter, their weapons deadlier. But Thomas had learned their ways. He never faced them head-on. He struck fast and vanished. He used the jungle itself as his ally. He led them into traps, misled them with false trails, and forced them to fight in places where he held the advantage. Each time a hunter fell, the others grew more cautious. Their voices shook with anger, but also with fear. The crowd above whispered louder with every passing hour. The story of the hunt was changing before their eyes. By the 3rd day under the dome sky, the hunters had lost too many. Their numbers still outmatched Thomas, but their spirit was broken. They no longer laughed, no longer walked with pride. Instead, they crept through the jungle as if shadows hid monsters. And Thomas was that monster. He began to notice it in their movements. The way they jumped at small sounds, the way their heads turned too quickly, the way their red eyes flickered when they thought they saw him. He had become a ghost to them. They were hunting a man who refused to be caught, and worse, he was striking them down one by one. That night, when the false sky dimmed into artificial darkness, Thomas climbed high into a tree and looked out over the jungle. He could see faint lights where the hunters moved. They were nervous. They stayed close together, whispering more than before. Thomas smiled faintly, though his body ached with hunger and fatigue. He had turned their sport into a nightmare. The hunters had wanted entertainment, but now they were the ones being watched by something they could not control. He thought of his home on Earth, of the quiet nights in the forest, of the peace he once knew. That life was gone, stolen by these creatures, but he would not let them take his dignity. If this was to be his end, then he would make sure it was remembered. He would carve fear into their memory so deep that they would never again see humans as prey. The jungle echoed with the sound of another horn. It was sharper this time, filled with anger. Thomas understood. The hunters were calling reinforcements. They would come with everything they had left, but he did not tremble. Instead, he whispered to himself, his voice calm and steady. Come then. Come and see what fear truly feels like. Far above, the audience sat in silence. They had expected to watch a man's death. Instead, they were witnessing something else entirely, the rise of a legend. The hunters had come for sport, but what they found was their own nightmare. The alien forest was silent after the last clash. The strange tall trees with glowing leaves no longer shook with the sound of alien weapons. Smoke rose from a broken camp where armored hunters had once gathered with confidence. Now only one figure stood among the shadows. It was not an alien, but a man. His name was Aaron, and he was the last one moving in a place that was meant to be his grave. He stood still for a moment, catching his breath. His body was scratched, his clothes torn, and his muscles burned from days of struggle, yet his eyes were clear and sharp. In those eyes there was no fear left, only the weight of survival. Aaron looked around the forest, knowing the game was over. The hunters who had brought him here were gone. He had turned their sport into a nightmare they would never forget. Aaron walked to the last fallen hunter. The alien's suit was cracked, and its glowing mask lay broken in the dirt. The alien had called him prey when the hunt began. Now the hunter lay silent while the man still breathed. Aaron pulled away the energy rifle the alien had dropped. He studied it for a moment, then tossed it aside. He had won not because of weapons, but because of his will. He began to move toward the hill where the hunters had landed their ship. His steps were slow but steady. Every step carried the memory of the traps he had built, the ambushes he had planned, and the nights he had survived with nothing but his mind and courage. The ship stood ahead like a dark beast on the edge of the forest. Its metal sides gleamed under the pale moons of the alien sky. It was guarded by no one now. The hunters had believed they would never need to protect their own vessel. They had been wrong. Aaron climbed the ramp and entered the ship. The inside smelled of strange oils and burning metal. Lights flickered along the walls and strange alien symbols glowed across glass screens. He had stolen pieces of their technology before, so the sight was not new to him. He pressed his hand on the panel he had seen one of the hunters use earlier. The ship hummed and the door sealed shut behind him. For the first time since his capture, Aaron felt the walls of safety around him. He moved through the corridors slowly, searching each room. There were racks of armor, stores of food, and crates of shining tools he could not name. In one chamber he found a console that displayed the stars. He touched the symbols until the image shifted to show a blue and white world. It was Earth. Aaron stared at it for a long time. His chest tightened as he saw his home shining far away. He whispered to himself, not with weakness but with promise. He would return. Before setting the course, he sat down in the command seat. His body trembled with both pain and strength. He thought of the hunters who had laughed when they released him into the forest. They had believed he would run and hide until he was caught. They had believed he would break like so many other creatures before. Instead, they had learned what a human could become when pushed to the edge. Aaron touched the controls again. The ship's engines roared, shaking the ground outside. He guided it slowly into the sky. Below, the alien forest grew small. The broken camps and scattered armor were left behind. The hunt was finished. The prey had taken the ship of his hunters and claimed victory. As the ship rose higher, Aaron thought about the hunters' society. He had seen their pride in their weapons, their laughter when the game began, and their arrogance when they thought him weak. Now their society would learn the story of this hunt. Other hunters would ask what happened to the crew who chased the human. The answer would spread in whispers. The story would become legend among them. They would remember that one human had stood alone against them and turned fear back on those who had tried to play with his life. Aaron's hands gripped the controls tighter. He was not only returning for himself, he was carrying the message of all mankind. Humans were not creatures to be hunted for sport. Humans could fight, adapt, and rise above any trap. The galaxy would know it now. The ship broke through the clouds and entered the black sky. Stars spread out like a field of fire. Aaron stared at them, his heart steady. He no longer felt like prey. He no longer felt alone. He felt like a shadow that had hunted back. The hunters had called themselves masters, but they had been unprepared for the spirit of man. Hours passed as he worked with the controls. He used memory and instinct to guide the ship. He pressed symbols that matched the stolen fragments he had studied before. The engines adjusted course, and soon the star of Earth's sun grew on the screen. Aaron leaned back in the seat, his eyes heavy but still sharp. He thought about his family, his people, and the world he would see again. Yet in his mind, he also thought of what might come next. The hunters might not stop with one failure. Their leaders might send more. But now humanity would be ready. He had seen their methods. He had felt their arrogance. And he had shown them the cost of underestimating a human being. The ship moved through the silent void, cutting across light years. Aaron sat quietly, letting his mind rest but never letting his guard fall. He knew that when he reached Earth, he would not only be a survivor, he would be a warning to the galaxy. On a distant world, far from the ship, the society of the hunters was already shaken. Reports of the failed hunt arrived through broken signals. Families of the hunters demanded answers. Leaders whispered of shame. No one had expected defeat from one unarmed human. Fear spread quietly, but it grew fast. The hunters who once enjoyed the sport began to question if they had created something darker. They began to fear the idea of more humans like Iran. The galaxy would soon hear of the man who was taken for sport, and who became the nightmare of his hunters. He was not just a survivor of a cruel game. He was proof of what humanity could be when faced with impossible odds. Aaron sat in silence as the ship neared his home star. The glow of Earth grew larger, shining with the promise of return. He closed his eyes for a moment, and a single thought stayed with him. If they ever came again, they would not find prey. They would find hunters waiting in the shadows of Earth. The ship carried him forward, a lone man who had faced an entire pack and won. His story would live among the stars, carried in both fear and respect. For in the heart of the galaxy, one truth would remain clear. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was the nightmare that hunters should fear.